Hola, bienvenidos al primer encuentro de esta serie de workshops del 2026. El objetivo de estos encuentros es que un investigador nos comparta, más que sus desarrollos y sus resultados, sus problemas a la hora de investigar aspectos que tienen que ver con plataformas mediáticas. Eh, Después de eso, que otro investigador, que una figura destacada ofrezca sus impresiones y a partir de ahí empezar un diálogo. Porque nosotros estamos convencidos que las plataformas son objetos sofisticados, pero son particularmente objetos complejos, en el sentido de los sistemas complejos. Esa complejidad tiene que ser desenmarañada y todo el tiempo pone en cuestión nuestros presupuestos metodológicos y nos obliga a veces a resoluciones ad hoc. Entonces, para enfrentar esas soluciones ad hoc, lo más importante es trabajar en equipos. No hay manera de avanzar en el conocimiento de las plataformas que no sea a través de compartir resultados y de discutirlos en grupo. Por eso esta serie. I was saying in Spanish that we are here in the first workshop series 2026 of REDINPLA. The main object is to give the opportunity to the research to offer us their problems in the research about some object, and after that, excuse me, I need a second. And after that, get insights from a leading expert in the field, and wrap up with the group discussion. Because objects in platforms are for us a complex objects that all the time push us to rethink our methodological assumptions. So after that, thank you very much, Thomas, for being here with us. You are just a friend of REDINPLA. Y Agustina, es tu momento, te escuchamos.
Ok, ¿puedo compartir pantalla?
Sí.
Let me just put presentation on. Oh. Please let me know if you are seeing what I'm seeing.
Sí, se ve perfecto.
Great, excellent. So, let me. Is it working? Or
The
not?
video doesn't. I mean, we can see a video now, but we don't
Okay.
see it.
Is it?
It works.
Great, thank you. So, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Thomas. Good morning, everyone who's watching us from YouTube as well. Thank you very much for being here at this workshop that we organized by our network. My name is Agustina Lassi, and today I'm going to talk about an approach that is very complex, an object of study that is very difficult, which is platforms. In this case, adding the issue of the integration of LLMs into their functioning, which is my main aspect of work. Let me start with a not so pleasant subject, talking about our object of research. And let me be clear about this. It is not that I like Alex Karp, nor that I agree with everything he has to say, mostly disagree strongly with everything he has to say, but I heard him yesterday saying something that I think will help us understand one of the biggest and most difficult aims of my proposal. So let's hear him, and then I'll start with the presentation.
One thing, though, that I think even now is underestimated by all actors in industry, and including in Silicon Valley, is how disruptive these technologies are. If you are going to disrupt the economic and therefore political power significantly of one party space, highly educated, often female voters who vote mostly Democrat, and military and working class people who do not feel supported, and you feel like you believe that that's going to work out politically, you're in an insane asylum. Like, that you cannot have it. This technology largely Democratic voters and makes their economic power less and increases the economic power of vocationally trained, working class, often male voters. And so these disruptions are going to disrupt every aspect of our society.
Okay, so now that we heard him, let me switch to the next slide. There we go. That's the name of my research, my PhD research. As you will see, this work is part of my doctoral thesis, which I am currently writing. In it, I try to combine Foucault's genealogical method to reconstruct the history of generative artificial intelligence, specifically those linked to natural language processing, with an analysis of interfaces, relations, and governance of three of the most widely used platforms in Latin America, which are Alphabet, Meta, and Microsoft. Later, I will explain why I use these ones. I use a sort of a game of words, the title, the historical query in words because of the LLMs, but let me go forward and I will explain you why. So the choice of these three companies responds to their complementary approaches to the development of artificial intelligence. Google has led research and development in AI technologies and initially adopted a lower profile strategy. Meta, on the other hand, followed a similar path, but both companies bet on the vertical integration of their products into software and platform systems. In some cases, through open source models, like Meta, and in others, through closed systems with paid subscription options, like Alphabet. Microsoft, for its part, opted for a strategic partnership with OpenAI, in which Azure cloud services are combined with OpenAI's most advanced models in its flagship product, which is Copilot. Together, these different strategies allows me to observe not isolated actors, but an interconnected ecosystem. This process, I chose it to start to study it on 2017, but we all know that it started long before 2017. I decided to mark starting points with the publication of the paper that introduced Transformers technology, Attention is All You Need, by Google. This process is deeply shaped by what we know as platformization, which Thomas knows very well, a concept very well described by our guest. At the same time, it includes enough elements or traces, as I like to call them, from a Foucauldian perspective, to argue that this decade, 2017-2027, which is next year, but my aim is to finish it next year, this thesis, this decade is shaping up to be a new stage of platformization. That is the expansion of platforms into infrastructures that organize social, economic, and cultural life, in which generative AI is and will continue to be central protagonist. As you may see, Thomas, I take much of your aim and your theoretical framework to work with my thesis. It is precisely the multiplicity of relationships that we can observe every day between this technological layer, states, economy, commerce, population, mental health, politics, the environment, and war, as we have seen, that allows us to trace actions that structure the field of other actions, turning platforms into infrastructures that exercise power. In other words, platforms no longer simply mediate actions. They increasingly shape what actions are possible, which actions are possible. In recent years, more strongly than ever, we are experiencing the enormous power held by those who develop and deploy these technologies. These technologies are also present in our devices more and more frequently, recording what we feel, what we want, what we think, our dreams, our doubts, and our fears. These ways of These are all ways of understanding our world. Having said that, and returning to the methodological aspects of my research, my main interest lies in analyzing the process through which large language models are integrated into digital platforms, specifically evaluating the role of those platforms. The role those platforms play as infrastructures of power, which is another term that I took from your work, Thomas. This is the main analytical thread that runs throughout my entire project. My goal is to understand this new stage of platformization as its redefinition in institutional, economic, and socio-technical terms, which allows these companies, these three companies that I'm studying, to accumulate unprecedented power. The choice of these three corporations is particularly important because their characteristics in Latin America differ from those they present in the European Union or the United States, both in regulatory terms and in the role users play in data collection and product positioning. This is how I came to divide the analysis of this process into three dimensions: an economic layer, which I elaborate on later, an institutional aspect, in which these platforms establish governance frameworks for the language models and define what they can do with the information they receive and process, and a final aspect linked to interfaces and technical developments that enable our interactions with these language models. Given the limited time today, I will only focus on two of these dimensions. Unlike the first stage of platformization, the strategies and dynamics linked to the development of generative AI in these corporations, we already know, as well as in the new ones that emerge as a part of this process, are different. Yes, there is a dynamic of competition and rivalry that is fundamentally explained as a survival imperative in the face of supply chain constraints. They are different not only in scale, but also in speed and in their dependence on infrastructure. In addition, financial and operational capital flows are circular. As a result, we can see companies like Microsoft competing with Google, while at the same time, both cooperate with or depend on the same hardware or cloud computing providers. This dimension also includes systemic risks linked to the critical dependence on a single actor, such as NVIDIA, as well as the constant threats of supply chain disruptions caused by the US geopolitical and war-related decisions, as we have seen these last few weeks, for example. At the same time, we see a scenario in which Europe is beginning to understand the importance of owning its own infrastructure and platforms as well. China is building efficient models with performance equal or superior to Western ones, and we live with the fear that everything happening may be a large bubble about to burst. So, for all these reasons, these corporations cannot be analyzed individually as if they operate with entirely different strategies, or as they did before, right? In a stage, before the pandemic world, before the pandemic, they were working separately, and they weren't that interested on what the infrastructure world was offering them, as they are now, that they are very worried about getting new deals every day. So that's one of my interests. Follow that. Okay, so to collect all this information, here comes like the hard part, the difficult part. And I will use an automated collection strategy. Why is this? Because I'm practically alone. Many of my students that work with me analyzing this are here listening to this. So hi Camila, hi Diego, hi everyone. But I will use an automated collection strategy that uses data mining and direct API consumptions to ensure traceability, reproductivity, and transparency. Some of the strategies that I intend to use are the News API or the GBLT project API, which is Google actually, but it's based on news, global data entry. This last one is the one I prefer because it's global, it's multilingual, and it includes Spanish version of the news. I will also access to regulatory and financial documents by repositories, by the SEC, the EDGAR API, which is the main access to that information. And then I will have institutional content extraction implementing Python with a web scraping script so that I can periodically extract from institutional websites, official technical blogs, and developer pages information about these three corporations and those actions that they are taking with another companies, with the SEC, etc. Then I'm going to work on historical changes by using the Wayback Machine API to search for everything that happened before 2022. That is when I started to study this and record this. So from 2017 till 2022, every aspect concerning economical relations with these three companies and LLM development, I'm going to have to search it with Wayback Machine. And finally, for data storage processing, all collected data will be stored in structured and auditable databases that are going to be part of the annex of my thesis. And I will process those with Panda, which is available online, and it's an open source API. And the idea with this is to ensure traceability and avoid generative AI mediation. So that would be for the part where I'm trying to write to record everything concerning economical aspects of the platforms and generative AI. The second dimension that I will talk about today is a technical dimension, throughout which LLMs are integrated into the software and hardware we use daily. This is where these abstract power relationships become embedded in everyday practices. To analyze this, I have created around 14 categories that include operating systems, search engines, applications, GPS navigation systems, word processors, wearables, screenless devices, and hardware. This hardware category includes AI integrated into microchips, in smartphones, televisions, computers, automobiles, and household appliances, among others. Okay, so this is the moment where you may ask yourselves, how in hell do I plan to collect all this information, organize it, and present it in a way that provides a good snapshot of what has happened during this decade? Okay, I have no idea. The question usually comes up very quickly when I talk about this. I have been working on this. I have papers published on this. It's not that it's that I'm going to start from scratch. But I must say that I like to think it as a large exercise in imperfect human, handcrafted, eyed documentation. Registrational, but not definitive. Sophisticated, but not perfect. To comfort myself, I always remember that Jose has published The Culture of Connectivity long after the Flickr app ceased to exist. So I say, okay, so if something in the middle is lost, okay, the work was worth it anyway. So let me continue. What are you watching? Okay, you're watching. As you will notice in this presentation, I focus on the integration of technology, of LLM technology. That is to say, the operational invisibility achieved through technological integration and seamless workflows processes. For instance, when AI-generated suggestions appear directly inside email services and word processors, so by operational invisibility, I mean forms of integration that minimize users' awareness of AI system, which is more and more regular these days. You know, the AI is starting to be invisible in our everyday work. The way I intend to document these interfaces is by observing and recording visual representations in the flagship products of Gemini, Copilot, and Meta AI across applications, search engines, social networks, word processors, email service, and operating system. And I cut there because if not, I'm going to lose my mind. These will be the spaces in which I observe text and voice interfaces, buttons, and the way of interacting with AI through the camera, the microphones, or text. I do this while critically examining how this corporation seeks to make interactions with language model almost imperceptibly, thereby affecting users' process of subjectivization, which is a term that is very difficult to pronounce in English. Subjectivation. There. So there is a third dimension that I will not address on this occasion due to time constraints. I'm not trying to make it very long because I want to hear you, related to the governance of this technology. I'm going to use an automated strategy as well. Maybe I will work, I have not decided this yet. I think that I would work with something similar to Notebook LM, maybe to analyze the content on the terms of service and privacy policies and their evolution over time in order to document those changes, restrictions, and permissions imposed by these companies, especially in Latin America, which I think it may be different. I have not decided yet if I'm going to search specifically for Latin American content or if I'm going to try to compare them in case they are different. I have not decided that yet. It is a working process. So I have the assistance of a small, modest research team made up of students eager to learn and be trained, who will help me with the data collection, as well as the help of universities through the scholarships and some little money that I could gather. The thing is that we don't have that much opportunities to build this kind of investigations in Latin America. Times are hard. Our government's shortcuts on education are more and more big, and we are trying to do our best in this situation. I have 4 jobs. I have 2 research teams, and I'm still trying to form myself, to study, to learn. So every help that we can get in the network, with the help of you, Thomas, and everyone that you know, Gianmarco is coming to Argentina now, and we're going to him, which he interviewed you. So every help that we can get is great. So that's all from me. I would like to hear from you and what's your insights, your view about my work. And thank you very much for being here today.
Popular, Agustina. Thomas, if you want to say something, it's your moment.
Yes, great. Thanks. Thanks for having me, and thanks for this lovely presentation. I also very much look forward to visiting your university and being part of the local research community. So yeah, I have quite a few thoughts. I very much like sort of the way you're approaching this. It's actually very close to the research I'm currently doing. So that also there I have a number of thoughts that really come from that. So the first thing, maybe as an advice, right? So no, let me start differently. So maybe the first thing to say is I think I really like the way you're approaching this and thinking about in terms of infrastructural power relations. I think that's indeed very much at the center of currently what we're seeing. And I also very much like that you're understanding this as a new phase of platformization, because I very much think that's the case. And I think increasingly we're seeing that, especially over the last year or so. And there are a number of reasons. On the one hand, how these foundation models, large language models, are developed, but also how these companies are currently trying to monetize these models. So that's that's really quite a current development. All right, so but I'll get to that in a moment. So first, maybe some advice. I think what you're doing is very ambitious, and you're almost trying to do everything. And doing everything usually means that you can't do everything that well. So maybe I can say how we sort of decided what to do and not to do, given how close your research is to what we're doing. So what we're not doing, and given the research you're currently sort of focusing on, I would probably recommend not to do that either. Is really look at the user side of things, right? So we're not looking at end users. Because that's an entire area of research that really requires very particular methods. Really, also looking at sort of how users are engaging with these models. It requires focus groups, surveys, interviews, and so on. And given how deep you're already looking into those questions of infrastructure, I think that's maybe a bridge too far. So that's the first thing I would say. And the second thing is that I think you also need to realize, and we are very aware of that as well, is that it's so in terms of research interest, this is a super crowded field. So there are many researchers around the globe who are trying to do very similar things as you are and we are. That means that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. It certainly means that you should, but you need to figure out what your original contribution to all this is. And so what we decided in our own research is to focus on these developments from the perspective of Europe. And that precisely by taking that particular perspective allows us to question certain developments in the light of sort of European liberal, democratic sort of and social democratic values that are at stake in more generally sort of questions of platformization. But that's also what we did in the Platform Society, which you've read, right? We very much sort of think about platforms from the perspective of Europe. And obviously, given where you are situated, I think it would be very interesting to make your positionality very explicit. So I would probably try to think from Argentina or Latin America, right? And think about what does this actually mean in terms of how economies are becoming organized around sort of platforms, and then specifically these AI powered platforms. So I would very much encourage you, and if you're sort of thinking about how to do that, then I'm happy to talk to you, maybe not outside of sort of a YouTube discussion. But I think that makes it much more interesting and also politically more urgent, which I think is important, right? Because there's a lot of sort of at stake. All right, then. Okay, then you started with this clip from Alex Karp from Palantir, and he actually talks about sort of work disruption, right? Which is also, I think, a major issue in what we're currently seeing. And I think he's rightly pointing out that what we're now seeing is sort of increase in economic power of vocationally trained working class people, precisely because what those workers bring to the economy is very difficult to automate at this point, right? So robotics really hasn't developed that far yet in terms of replacing sort of the skills of people. Yet knowledge work is obviously being heavily disrupted. So that's a very interesting question, and I think what we're seeing is that sort of entry level knowledge work is being heavily disrupted, yet more senior work is still quite, I think, still quite protected. I mean, whether that's the case and whether that will be the case in 2 or 3 years from now, that's another question. But what people are saying, also, for example, in software development, is that sort of the senior developer, the position of the senior developer is relatively safe for the moment, because they're much more involved in sort of long-term strategies, sort of higher level planning and so on. Whereas sort of entry-level knowledge work, whether it's programming or gathering information or writing pretty straightforward text, is heavily disrupted. So that's an interesting question. Not sure. So I think it's interesting, but I'm also not sure whether that's the core of what you're doing either. So we don't really look at that ourselves, precisely again because it's quite an important and a large discussion, and I think many people are already focusing on it. So now to get to the core of what you are doing, I think you're already really far on your way. So maybe a couple of thoughts on my part, which I think are very much in line with what you already presented. So what I'm seeing, very similar to what you're presenting, is indeed this strong entanglement between platforms and the development of these foundation models. So that's important because initially the idea was that we're entering into a sort of new era in which platforms are no longer that important. And I think that's not the case at all. Instead, what we're seeing is deep entanglement. And the first, I mean, a couple of points of entanglement or integration you already pointed out. And so these foundation models rely on very heavy computational infrastructures, so computational power, which means that only a few companies are able to provide that. And those are precisely sort of the hyperscalers you highlighted. So Google, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, and OpenAI at this point. So that's the first one. Second one, of course, they rely on a lot of data, which maybe is a little bit more open in the sense that more actors in the online economy can sort of mobilize that data. But at the end, they rely very much on heavy financial investments, which only also a few actors are able to mobilize. And those are really very large financial investments, right? Which are also important because they also present some challenges to new players like OpenAI, for example. Okay, so then we're getting to the point where we're now, and I think that's where it becomes really interesting. So these things people have noticed these. I've already written about them, but where we're currently at is that huge investments have been made. Some of these companies, especially OpenAI, are running a deficit, right, continuously. And so they're burning money and they're not generating a lot of revenue. And so that's why a lot of people are talking about a AI bubble. So what we're now at this moment where these companies are desperately looking for revenue models. So how to actually do this. And interestingly enough, is that the moment they start looking at revenue models, they are starting to adopt the platform model. And they do that in a variety of ways. So what they're doing is opening up their boundaries. So they're creating, for example, markets for, initially, for example, for sharing prompts, selling prompts, and so on. I don't think that will be a very big market. They're opening it up for advertising, which is now coming in, right? So it's becoming advertising sort of funded development. And they're integrating with a variety of other services, which you all also pointed out, right? So they're, for example, Microsoft is really sort of integrating into its entire sort of Office set. What I think is quite interesting, what we're also seeing, and this corresponds again with the platform model, is that they're now building these dedicated services, so AI agents, on top of these models. So you now see sort of this turn to these very specific agents, which are presented as workers, that ultimately very much rely on the model, on the larger foundation model. What we're seeing is, again, exactly sort of that dynamic on the one hand of centralization, right? The computational infrastructure, data infrastructure that's centralized, yet a multiplicity of services that are running seemingly decentralized, so almost microservices, decentralized in a wide variety of different contexts. So centralization, decentralization at the same time. I think that's really interesting, and that corresponds with this platform model, and that then also allows other actors to integrate with these kinds of infrastructures, right? To start integrating these agents in the activities they develop, and then monetize these in a variety of ways. And whether that will generate enough revenue, that's not a question, but it will certainly mean, again, sort of a reorganization of the economy around these very large infrastructures. So with having said that, I think to me, the most important sort of angle of analysis is really around this integration between these platform/AI companies, which are very much AI companies now, and what we call complementers. So basically, all sorts of organizations, can be companies, can be government agencies, can be public organizations, can be societal organizations that sort of are integrating with these AI services and starting to offer them also to their audiences, customers, and so on. For example, a very simple example would be you provide a chatbot, for example, for your university, for students to be able to gather information on what program to choose or something along those lines. So that's a very simple form of integration, but I think that's where the core of the economic sort of changes initially will be, we will see them. All right, and then maybe one final remark. Okay, two final remarks. One of them is, I think we really need to realize how deeply infrastructural all this is. So much more so than in sort of the previous phase of platforms and platformization. This is about infrastructure. So because obviously, yeah, these models are so infrastructurally heavy. So even if you create smaller models, then they're still very heavy because they still rely on these foundation models. They are maybe distillated from them or built on top of them, but they still rely on sort of the foundation model. So very infrastructurally very heavy, which also means that now we see chip companies playing a quite important role in this economy, right? So NVIDIA, you already mentioned, is important here, but a variety of others are as well. And what we're seeing is these collaborations or integrations between these AI companies and these chip companies, where they're basically exchanging stock against each other. And that's interesting for both, right? Because AI companies will get investment within in there and access to these high level chips, and the other way around, these chip companies have guaranteed sort of customers for their chips, right? So they are becoming very, very entangled, which also means, of course, if all this fails, a lot fails, right? It's not just the AI company that fails, but it's a larger part of the economy that actually fails. So the stakes are very high. So I think it's important to think about the economic interest and strategies and stakes that go into these integrations. And so I think once you start looking at all of these different materials which you're collecting, so news items and developer pages and so on, that every time you need to figure out, so why is this integration happening? What are the gains from the various actors which are involved? And what are the stakes, obviously? And ideally then, I think it's interesting to do so from a Latin American or Argentinian perspective, because I think that's where you probably can make the most original contribution. So that would be my remarks.
Wow. Thank you very much. I really like that whole page. So thank you very much for your insights. I knew that I was prepared for you to hear that you were going to say that there's a lot of people working on this, that it's very similar to your approach. I was very nervous about that because I said, oh no, my God, he's going to think I'm plagiarism. No, I'm citing you everywhere. So the thing is that Latin American perspective is what is going to be the most part of my work. Maybe I didn't focus on that because I was talking about methodology aspects, but it's great that you pointed out at me so that when I present my investigation, I can talk more about that. The thing is that I chose those three and left some others like Amazon outside because of the effect they have on Latin American users. They are very, very used in our countries. They have different regulations here in Latin American users. So that's why I focused on those three corporate.
Okay, can I ask one question, by the way, about the three? So you're not focusing on OpenAI at the moment, right?
No, I'm not, because I try to focus on three very settled platforms, like with a long story.
I can see that, but why OpenAI is so interesting? It's obviously it's really one of the leaders, but it didn't start as a platform company, right? Whereas the others did, and that makes it interesting because what we're now seeing is that OpenAI also very much follows the platform model, right? So that makes it such an interesting case, right? Is that it's kind of an illustration that it's hard for any company, any tech company, to really escape sort of the platform logic. So in that case, I think, I mean, I don't want to sort of mess up your entire research here, but it's interesting I think OpenAI is a very interesting case for that reason. And another reason why it's so interesting is that its financial resources are obviously much more limited. Although it is able to mobilize very, very large resources, it doesn't have huge reserves like Google does, or Microsoft has, or to some extent also Meta. So OpenAI is probably almost constantly sort of at the verge of failing. So that makes it also a very interesting case.
Yeah, I agree with that. It was a difficult decision. I actually chose not to work with OpenAI because of the characteristics of Meta in our country specifically. Meta in our country offers Meta AI for free in WhatsApp, in the WhatsApp app, and many of, for example, Argentinians or Brazilians use Meta AI over ChatGPT because it doesn't consume data from their cell phones. I mean, like.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
So,
Yeah.
so here, not specifically my experience, but in most of the Argentinian users, Meta AI is very much more used than ChatGPT. So those
Yeah,
are
that's a good
the
reason.
specific aspects of
I see.
Latin American users
that makes
that are
sense.
different.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense to me. That's a good reason.
That's a good, that was the main reason that I chose to use Meta, and also because it's an open source LLM, and it has a different strategy from Google. So I chose 3 different structures so that I can compare the strategies they use and everything. Considering that Google is very well set in Latin America, that everyone uses a Gmail, that Meta and WhatsApp is the most used service, and also Facebook in Argentina, for example, has the most amount of users in Latin America, and Microsoft as well offers, for example, in every university that has like a contract with Microsoft, we use an Office version that includes Copilot, and that we all use. So, so they have a very large penetration on our population.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Much bigger than ChatGPT. Much bigger.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, but just I would encourage you to follow at least OpenAI, because I think it's going to be an interesting. It is an interesting case, but the reasons you point out are very good. So stick with those 3.
Okay. Anyway, I'm following OpenAI because it's a huge player. First one who launched it. I mean, it has to be on my research. I have to name it. They have a contract with Microsoft, so it's not that I'm not going to address them. It's just that I'm not going to study them deeply.
Yeah,
right?
I understand. Yeah. And one other small remark is the sources. So you're looking at news sources. You're looking at developer pages. Are you also looking into annual reports, patents, and court cases?
I think that is not my principal aim. I'm not sure about that. I'm just trying to follow the money flows.
Yeah, but the annual reports are very interesting because they give sort of a statement about their larger strategies. So that's interesting.
Okay.
Court cases are usually, I mean, it depends, but have often been a very interesting source for understanding sort of the specificity of the technical configurations we're looking at. Because in a court case, they often have to make a lot of sort of aspects explicit, or have to reveal them, which they usually try to protect. So in the past, we've often used sort of court cases precisely for this reason, sort of as a source for understanding sort of these configurations.
Excellent.
Yeah, patents are difficult. Maybe not do those, but
yeah, no, patents are very difficult. I try to look at them, and I couldn't get that information from that. But court cases, I haven't thought about it, so I will consider them. That's a great idea. Thank you very much. Santiago, do you have anything to say?
No, no es mi área de expertise por donde vos fuiste. We've been over through most of these aspects that Thomas pointed out yesterday in our chat with Agustina, but I have nothing to add to this. ¿Alguien quiere hacer un comentario, alguna pregunta? Any question, any comment? Okay. Well, for me, thank you very much for being with us again. We again learn a lot from you. that trick to pay attention to the court issues was genius. I didn't realize that it was an input. So thank you very much for me. Te dejo el cierre a vos, Agustina.
Okay.
Great.
Well,
Well, thank you.
thank you, Thomas. Again, thank you to
Yeah, it was
everyone.
wonderful to be here.
Gracias a todos los que están, a los que se conectaron, a los que nos van a ver por YouTube también. Dejé mis contactos ahí, también los de la red. Los invitamos a formar parte de la red de investigadores en plataformas. Son espacios así, de encuentro en los que pensamos, en los que compartimos. So, esta vez nos tocó Thomas, seguramente estemos invitando a otros para charlar y discutir. Thank you very
Pasamos
much.
el chivo si querés.
Sí, aprovechamos.
El 13 de marzo es hoy. El 9 de abril discutimos sobre plataformas de streaming con José Luis Fernández. On April 9th, we will talk about streaming platforms with José Luis Fernández, who is a main researcher in semiotics and platforms here in Argentina and Latin America. Así que
Okay,
nada,
so
sí.
los
Perdón.
esperamos, we wait you there, los esperamos allí. Thank you very much, Thomas. It's
Thank
been a
you.
pleasure, and I have learned a lot. I
Great.
hope
Me
everyone
too.
else also.